He drew his sword Excalibur that he had gained by Merlin from the Lady of the Lake, which, shining brightly as the light of 30 torches, dazzled the eyes of his enemies. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are across the kingdom of Camelot. Today we are taking our first dive into Arthurian mythology, and really we're just going to look at a sword that everyone knows rather well, Excalibur, and why it was particularly so powerful. So this isn't really a history of the sword, but an examination of it and its thematic role to see why it is so powerful as we begin to look into this mythology. Now, to be honest, I've played a game recently called The Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon on Steam. And I've been watching this game for quite a long time, very much like the style of it, roleplay kind of game, sort of like Skyrim and Oblivion. And I played a lot of it a few weeks ago, and I really, really liked it. So I highly recommend it, and it was inspiration for starting to get into this sort of mythology. So my friends, thank you all for joining me today. Let's take a look at why Excalibur was so powerful. So despite much of what we know about the Arthurian mythology, we tend to actually conflate Excalibur with the sword and the stone. So when King Arthur, or before he was king rather, drew the sword from the stone, it was not actually Excalibur. While the sword from the stone was more of a test to see if Arthur was indeed chosen, and he was, of course. So Excalibur was given by the Lady of the Lake, some sort of mystic figure, perhaps a ruler or sorceress from Avalon, this place of healing and magic and fate. And we'll talk a lot about Avalon as it's central to this story here in a bit. This blade has supernatural abilities, right? It is powerful. It shines with this blinding light in battle. It can cut through anything, right? It says something along the lines of cutting through iron like it was wood. So, very powerful, very sharp. And it could even cut through magical armor, said to be an indestructible and eternally sharp sword that never needed to be sharpened. Very powerful. And it symbolized kingship, the right to rule of King Arthur himself. And truly, it came to him and was used by him during his journeys as his symbol of kingship, feared by enemies. And from outside of the mythology, we of course know Excalibur to be one of the original magical legendary swords used by a hero. Now, it's important to say that while the sword was powerful and was magical, just as Arthur himself had this divine sort of fate about him, its scabbard, the sheath of Excalibur, was perhaps even more powerful because, again, this was either given directly to Arthur by the Lady of the Lake, or other versions of the tale have the mother of King Arthur, Queen Igraine, give it to him as well. But either way, this must have had a similar or heavier sort of magic, as it prevented blood loss, it prevented death, made him pretty much invincible in combat. And even Merlin, with all the magic he knew, told Arthur that the sheath is worth 10 of the sword, which is saying quite a lot. Now, let's talk about how Arthur is riding high. He becomes the king, he establishes Camelot, his kingdom, the Knights of the Round Table is married, and all of this sort of stuff. But there is betrayal and loss and this sort of decline in Arthur's kingdom as the story goes on. Morgan Le Fay, who's Arthur's sister, either out of jealousy or vengeance or just a hatred for Arthur, steals and actually discards the sheath into a lake. Now, as the sheath might have come from the lake and the Lady of the Lake, it returns to the waters, and it is never found again, setting up Arthur's weakness, his Achilles' heel, as it were, as his mortality returns, and that, just as his kingdom and its people are a little bit beginning to fade and have some cracks, right? There's an affair between his wife and Sir Lancelot, allegedly, betrayal from his either son or nephew, Mordred, and this coincides with all of that. So Arthur begins to, and everything around him begins to diminish. And so, in the Battle of Camlon, he is either wounded or killed by Mordred. And perhaps after this, the tales kind of split off about Arthur, whether he dies in Avalon or is taken there to heal. But Excalibur, while it was right there with him and a large part of his story and how he succeeded, it couldn't save him from that mortal wound like the sheath could. So this is all to say that Excalibur's power came from Avalon, and it would return to Avalon, or at least to the Lady of the Lake, as another knight, Bendeveer, would return the sword to her at Arthur's death or after he was mortally wounded before going to Avalon. A mystic hand catches it, vanishes beneath the water. So as the sword came forth from Avalon, it probably returned to it. And again, if Arthur himself went to Avalon, perhaps he reunited with his sword. This is all to say that much like King Arthur and his fate, his divinity himself, how it came much from beyond and perhaps even was affected by Avalon, so too was the magic of his sword and its scabbard from Avalon. And so, just like him, just like how he was legendary, it too was legendary, as it came from this incredible land. While I was preparing this video, it reminded me of Aragorn and Anduril recalling to Numenor, perhaps. So, very cool, and many archetypes in literature and fantasy and mythology come from the tale of this sword and its bearer. And so this is just a little bit of a initial exploration. So the tale of Excalibur, it's meant to explore these themes of kingship, honor, glory, when to use a sword and when to leave it in its scabbard, and so forth. A perfect parable for this glorious king of mythology. It could be that, through hope for a remade kingdom of Camelot, that from the mist of Avalon beyond, the sword and its bearer could return after he is healed when he is needed most. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video on kind of an introduction to the Arthurian mythology. Let me know if you'd like to see more in the comments below. If you did, hit that like button, share this with a friend, and let me know what else you'd like to see us cover. Please hit that subscribe button, and my friends, thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.